You have your Bibles open to Mark chapter 7. And while you're doing that, happy Mother's Day to all of our mothers, grandmothers, adopted mothers. And I learned as I was growing up, there were ladies in the church who may have not been biological mothers, but they acted like mothers and grandmothers. So happy Mother's Day to you all. We are still in our encounters with Jesus. We're actually going to skip 2 of them and go to one today because it's Mother's Day, and this is about a mother. And then we'll finish up the rest of them in the next couple of Sundays. But Mark chapter 7 is where we are this morning. Beginning in verse 24 down through 30. And there's also a parallel account of this in Matthew 15. And I'm kind of going to share details because they give different details from both Gospels. But I'm going to go ahead and read from verse 24 down to verse 30 of Mark chapter 7. He got up and departed from there to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, but he could not escape notice. Instead, immediately after hearing about him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Gentile, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she was asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the little children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." But she replied to him, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he told her, "Because of this reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." But when she went back to her home, she found her child lying on the bed, and the demon was gone. Now, I'll be completely honest with you. This story has always kind of rubbed me a bit wrong because I misunderstood what was going on here. Especially when you look at Matthew's account and Mark's account, and you look at everything that is being said here, it just kind of set wrong with me because it sounds like Jesus is calling this lady a dog. And maybe that's what it sounds like to you too, but we're going to work through this because this is actually one of the most beautiful encounters in the Gospel of Mark if you understand what is going on. It's beautiful because of the woman's faith, and Jesus recognizes this mother's faith. And it's also beautiful because of the promise it holds for those who weren't Jews. First of all, this woman, it says she's a Syrophoenician. And actually in Matthew, it actually mentions she's a descendant of the Canaanites. And if you remember who the Canaanites were, that was the group of people that the Jews were supposed to go into the promised land and wipe out because they were wicked, they were evil. Jesus is in an area around these 2 cities named Tyre and Sidon, which is modern-day Lebanon if you look on a map. And this is northwest of Galilee where Jesus' base of operation is. This is hostile territory. There are some Jews there. Jesus is at the home of some Jews living in this area, but they're living behind enemy lines if you want to be right honest about it. Tyre and Sidon, when you go back and look through the Old Testament, these are 2 cities that are mentioned as Israel's ancient enemies. In Matthew 11, Jesus, he's talking to those who are hearing him preach around Capernaum in his hometown, and he's like, it will be better for those in Tyre and Sidon and Sodom and Gomorrah than for you guys, because if they had heard and seen what I am doing here, they would have repented. This was Israel's natural enemies. They were wicked, evil people. And this is where Jesus is. He's found a group of Jews there. He's gotten away because everywhere he goes, as you've noticed through these encounters, everywhere he goes, what happens? The crowds follow him. Every time he does a miracle, people hear about it and they come from everywhere, and he can't get any peace. He can't get any time alone. So here he is in one of the last places you would expect to find a Jewish rabbi. Hostile territory. And he goes into a house and he doesn't want anyone to know. He needs time to kind of get away from the crowds. Jesus is God in the flesh, but he is still a human being. He still has to sleep. He still has to eat. He still has his physical body he has to take care of. And instead of having some peace and quiet, instead of having this quiet time with this family that is hosting him, instead of having a moment with the 12 disciples to just kind of unwind, they find out that he is there, which means news of Jesus' miracles has even reached deep into Gentile territory, deep into enemy territory. And we have this mother. She's desperate. As we've been looking through these encounters in the book of Mark, and the next 2 we're going to look at, you see the same thing. You see people that are desperate. They have reached the end of their rope. They have no other options. They have no other choices. And here we have this mother. It doesn't say that she believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. She's from a pagan land. She's from a pagan people. But she's heard about Jesus. Now, it's true those folks would have known a little bit about the Jewish religion. They would have known a little bit because Jews did live among them. And they had been Israel's enemies for a very, very long time. But this woman hears that there's this Jewish rabbi. He's come to where I live, and they say he can do all sorts of things. They say he can cast out demons. He can heal people. He can do these things. And she has no other choice. It doesn't say how old her daughter is. It doesn't say how long her daughter had been tormented by this demon. But nothing has worked. I want you mothers, and you fathers too, because we care about our children, but especially you mothers. Have you ever seen your child sick or your child going through something and there was absolutely nothing you could do to help them? How did you feel? Helpless. This woman can't do anything. She's watching her daughter be tormented by an evil spirit. Mark calls it an unclean spirit, which is a demon. Matthew actually says she was severely tormented by this demon. And we don't know why the demon chose this child, but like we looked at in the sermon about the demoniac out in the cemetery, it's perhaps because this woman is from a pagan family. This woman's family had worshipped false gods. But for whatever reason, her daughter, her little daughter, that's the word it uses. You're talking 5, 6 years old maybe, with an evil spirit, an unclean demon inside of her, tormenting her. And this mother can do absolutely nothing. She's willing to do anything. Have you ever been in a situation where you were willing to do anything, even if it was against the rules? Even if it might bring embarrassment? This woman doesn't know what else to do, but she's heard that there's a man, a Jewish man, a Jewish rabbi who is doing amazing things. And maybe, just maybe, if I go to him, he'll hear me and he'll help. This is wrong for a couple of reasons, and it may seem odd to us in the 21st century. But first of all, in the first century, women did not go and talk to men that were not their husbands or their fathers. The fact that she's a woman going to a man would have been taboo. It was just not something you did. It broke protocol. And not only is she a woman going to a man who is not her husband or her father, she's a Gentile. She's a pagan. And she's going into the presence of a Jewish rabbi. You just don't do this. She knew that this was unacceptable. She knew that she was facing criticism and scorn and perhaps even violence. Jews and Gentiles, especially in that area, they hated one another. Not quite as bad as the Jews and Samaritans hated one another, but it was close. So she goes. She goes to this home. I imagine she's terrified, frightened. Is he going to accept me? Is he going to listen to me? What is he going to do? But like I said, she has absolutely no other choice but to go to this man and beg. That's what she has to do. She has to beg him to listen, beg him to care, and beg him to help. And so she goes. It's interesting. When you look at the two accounts, in Matthew's gospel it says, she called him the Son of David. That's a messianic title. I mentioned when we were talking about the demoniac that was in the cemetery, I mentioned how it was a superstition in that day. If you called an entity by its name, you could get control or power over it. You see the demon doing that, calling Jesus the Son of the Most High. And perhaps this woman, because of superstition, because of the prevailing attitude of that day, calling him Son of David is trying to get his attention, trying to win his favor, trying to invoke his power, whether she really believed it or not. But it is possible because she's heard about him. His reputation has preceded him. Perhaps in the back of her mind, she's like, well, maybe this is that Messiah that the Jews talk about. And she calls out, help me. Mark's gospel is a lot shorter. You get more detail in Matthew. But initially, Jesus doesn't listen to her. He's basically silent. And in Matthew's gospel, you see Jesus' disciples say, send this woman away. She's bothering us. She's getting on our nerves. Get rid of her. Why are we listening to this pagan? Why do we even bother? But Mark says this woman, even after Jesus has been silent, even after the disciples have tried to send her away, she falls at Jesus' feet there in verse 25 and begs. Her last chance, her only hope. She begs. How many would have left as soon as Jesus ignored her? She came to him. Matthew says she asked, and Jesus basically says nothing. How many would have left when those 12 men said, get her out of here? But yet she stays. 2 rejections, and she falls to her knees and begs. And here's the part that I've always struggled with. Jesus, after her begging, hands and knees, falling down before him, Son of Man, help me. She's asking the Jewish Messiah to help her, a pagan outsider. And initially Jesus says nothing. The disciples try to send her away, but she is persistent. Will you do anything you can for your kids, moms and dads? Will you go through any length? This woman has already been rejected twice, and yet she still persists. Jesus, help. And then Jesus says, let the children be fed first, because it isn't right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Matthew's gospel says, he says, I have been sent for the lost sheep of Israel. I used to think that this was Jesus being dismissive. I used to think maybe this was Jesus being cold and callous, but it really isn't. First of all, Jesus is actually stating the truth when you look at the 2 accounts together. Jesus was sent as the Jewish Messiah to the lost sheep of Israel. That was his initial purpose. And when they rejected him, in John's gospel, you see that in the 1st chapter, when they rejected him, then he was sent for everyone. Jesus even said that he had sheep from another pen that he had been sent for. This is a teaching moment. This is not Jesus being hateful. This is not Jesus being racist, and I've heard people try to suggest both. This is Jesus speaking truth, and Jesus teaching not only this woman, but also his disciples. She falls on her knees. She's begging. She's given up any pride she may have had. And it's interesting, when you go through the Gospel of Mark, in the entire Gospel of Mark, she is the only one that Mark records as calling Jesus Lord. I had to go back and do the math on that. When I read that in the commentary, I'm like, that can't be right. But when you go through the Gospel of Mark, this is the only time in the Gospel of Mark that anyone calls Jesus Lord. And it's a pagan woman who is desperate, falling down at his hands and knees, begging for the life of her child. And she calls him Lord. She doesn't let his initial silence, he doesn't let the rebuke of the disciples, she doesn't even let this comment about feeding the bread to dogs bother her. Very quick, brief history lesson. Jews thought all dogs were dirty, in case you were wondering. They didn't like dogs. They were nasty scavenger animals that ran around in the streets. And it was one of their favorite slurs for Gentiles, was to call them dogs. They considered them dangerous, nasty animals, and they had nothing to do with them. However, this woman was a Greek. This woman was a Gentile, and much like us, they kept dogs for pets. They loved and adored dogs, just like I do. They were very affectionate for them. And there are different words in the languages for dog, and it's interesting. The word Jesus uses here for dog is not the word for a nasty, filthy scavenger dog. It's actually the word for a puppy. A cute little dog. And that's the word Jesus uses. Let the children be fed first. I came for the Jews. That is my purpose, is for the salvation of the Jews. And it would be wrong for me to divert from my purpose and do something different. But then look what she says. She's like Lord, and like I said, she's the only one in the entire Gospel of Mark to call him Lord. You don't even see the disciples call him Lord in the Gospel of Mark, just this one woman, this mother who is desperate. She's like, Lord, even the little dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Jesus is amazed by her faith. There are a couple of times in the gospel where Jesus points to all the Jews, including his 12 disciples who were following, and pointed out the faith of Gentiles. One was a Roman centurion who believed in Jesus, and he says, I haven't found faith like this in all of Israel. And another time is here with this mother. He's like, because of your reply, because of your faith, because you believe, you can go. Your daughter's healed. The demon is no longer there. Once again, Jesus is not being hateful. He's not being racist. He's not just dismissing this woman. He's reiterating his purpose that he was the Messiah for the salvation of Israel. But as you see through the Gospels, time and time again, as the Jews continue to reject him, and Gentiles come to him in faith, like this mother, he accepts them. This woman's faith is greater than probably we can even imagine. And notice, she first acknowledges what Jesus says. She hears him say those same words that makes me think he's calling her a dog. She hears that. He's like, I hear you, lady. It's not right for me to give the food to the puppies crawling under the table. How many of us would have walked away then? Well, he just called me a dog. He says, I'm not worthy. He says, I'm nothing. But even she understood, as a Gentile, as a pagan, she understood that his grace and his mercy, there was enough of it that it overflowed for everyone. She acknowledges what Jesus says. She's like, I hear you. Lord, I understand. But even those sitting at the table eating the meal, they'll throw scraps to the puppies. You come to my house, you'll see it. Throw scraps to the puppies, and I'm just begging for a scrap. I understand I'm not Jewish. I understand that you are the Messiah, but I'm just asking for a little scrap. A little scrap from your table will be enough. She accepts the truth and the primary reason, but she's willing to accept whatever blessing he decides to give her, if he chooses to. And as we see with Jesus, he's full of compassion. You see that throughout the Gospels. When Jesus sees these people suffering, he says he was full of compassion. He cared. And he sees this woman's remarkable faith. This mother who is willing to do anything, to endure anything for her child. He's like, your prayer has been answered. This isn't the first miracle for a Gentile. This isn't the first miracle for someone far off. The daughter's not there. But Jesus' compassion, Jesus' recognition of her faith is something consistent. You see it in all of these encounters in Mark that we're going through. Jesus is stirred with emotion when he sees people respond honestly and faithfully. And just like these other encounters, this miracle is immediate. Jesus says, your daughter's healed. And the woman goes home. We don't know how far she had to go. But when she gets there, her daughter's still in bed, recovering, and the demon's gone. Her daughter has been healed because of this encounter with the Son of Man. It's an interesting character to look at on Mother's Day. There are a lot of different mothers we could have looked at on Mother's Day, but I picked this one because there are so many people in our world like this mother that are lost, that are desperate, that are clinging for anything. Perhaps they don't have any faith to fall back on. Perhaps they don't know the truth, but they're desperate for an encounter. They're desperate for just a crumb to fall off the table. And this morning, as we're finishing up, whether you're a mother or a father, or whatever situation you find yourself in, much like this mother, who's desperate, who's hopeless, who has no other option, you have an opportunity this morning to have an encounter with Jesus. Now, after the cross, after the resurrection, that Jew-Gentile thing is no longer in effect. This morning, as we get ready to stand and sing our closing song, you can fully encounter Jesus. You don't have to come and beg at the table and expect a scrap to fall off on the floor and just grab it. This morning, as Jesus is calling, you can fully encounter him. You can profess your faith in him. You can be obedient and be baptized. And he says he'll forgive all your sins, your past. I'm sure that woman probably had a past. All of it's gone. You never have to look over your shoulder and worry about all those things that had happened in your life. They're done. And not only does he forgive your sins, he puts his Spirit inside you to walk with you, to help you deal with temptation, to help you deal with the struggles of the world. He promises he will never leave you. He'll be with you through all things. And then one day he says he's going to come back. And all of us who have had that encounter will spend all eternity with him. So this morning, if you have a decision you need to make, if you need to have an encounter with Jesus, come this morning. You don't have to have crumbs. You can sit down at the table and eat a full meal. I'm going to sing number 303.